How did the world stumble into its deadliest conflict? What were the key moments that sealed the fate of millions? Today, we're diving deep into the complete story of World War II. From the simmering tensions that ignited the flames to the catastrophic climax that reshaped our world forever. This is World War II, explained. To truly understand the Second World War, we have to go back to the end of the First. The year is 1919. The Treaty of Versailles, meant to bring peace, instead sowed the seeds of future conflict. Germany, blamed for the war, was crippled by massive reparations, territorial losses, and a deep sense of national humiliation. This fertile ground of resentment gave rise to extremist ideologies. In Italy, Benito Mussolini and his fascist party rose to power. And in Germany, a failed artist and World War I veteran named Adolf Hitler began his ascent, promising to restore Germany's former glory. By the early 1930s, the world was in the grip of the Great Depression. Economic chaos fueled political instability. In Japan, a militaristic government, hungry for resources, invaded Manchuria in 1931, signaling a new era of aggressive expansionism. The League of Nations, the international body created to prevent such acts, proved powerless. Hitler, watching from afar, took note. In 1933, he became Chancellor of Germany. He quickly dismantled the country's democracy, establishing the totalitarian Third Reich. He began secretly rearming Germany, a direct violation of the Versailles Treaty. The world watched with unease. In 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia. Again, the international response was weak. In 1936, Hitler marched his troops into the Rhineland, another forbidden zone. Emboldened by the lack of resistance, his ambitions grew. He formed an alliance with Mussolini's Italy, the Pact of Steel, and later with Japan, creating the Axis powers. Britain and France, haunted by the memory of World War I, pursued a policy of appeasement, hoping to avoid another war by giving in to Hitler's demands. This policy reached its peak in 1938 at the Munich Conference, where they allowed Germany to annex the Sudetenland, a part of Czechoslovakia. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned home declaring peace for our time. He couldn't have been more wrong. Just months later, in March 1939, Hitler broke his promise and seized the rest of Czechoslovakia. Appeasement had failed. The line was drawn. Britain and France pledged to defend Poland, Hitler's next target. In a shocking move, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, ideological enemies, signed a non-aggression pact in August 1939. Secretly, they agreed to divide Poland between them. The stage was set. On September 1st, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. The opening phase of the war was defined by a terrifying new German tactic blitzkrieg, or lightning war, using coordinated attacks of tanks, planes, and infantry. German forces overwhelmed their opponents. Poland fell in weeks. After a quiet period known as the Phony War, the blitzkrieg was unleashed on Western Europe in the spring of 1940. Denmark and Norway fell, followed by the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. The main Allied forces were out. German panzers bypassed the supposedly impenetrable Maginot Line, trapping British and French troops on the beaches of Dunkirk. In a miraculous evacuation, over 330,000 soldiers were rescued by a flotilla of naval and civilian vessels. But it was a retreat. On June 22, 1940, France surrendered. Hitler stood victorious in Paris. Britain now stood alone, led by the defiant Winston Churchill. Hitler launched the Battle of Britain, an air campaign designed to destroy the Royal Air Force and pave the way for an invasion. For months, the skies over England became a battlefield. The ARF, though outnumbered, fought valiantly, using radar and superior tactics to hold off the Luftwaffe. By autumn, Hitler postponed the invasion indefinitely. He had suffered his first major defeat, but the Blitz, the nightly bombing of British cities, continued, aiming to break the spirit of the British people. It didn't work. Their resolve hardened. While Europe was ablaze, tensions were escalating in the Pacific. Japan continued its expansionist campaign in China and Southeast Asia, seeking to create a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, which was essentially a Japanese empire. The United States, though officially neutral, opposed Japan's aggression, imposing economic sanctions. and an oil embargo that crippled the Japanese war machine. Faced with a choice between backing down or going to war, Japan chose war. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack was devastating, but it failed to destroy the American aircraft carriers, which were out at sea. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. The United States declared war on Japan, and a few days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S. The European and Asian conflicts had merged into a true global war. The year 1942 marked a high tide of Axis expansion. In Europe, German armies pushed deep into the Soviet Union, reaching the outskirts of Moscow and laying siege to Leningrad. In North Africa, Rommel's Afrika Korps threatened to seize the Suez Canal. In the Pacific, Japan conquered the Philippines, Singapore, and much of Southeast Asia. But 1942 was also the year the tide began to turn. In the Pacific, the Battle of the Coral Sea and the decisive Battle of Midway in June saw the U.S. Navy cripple the Japanese fleet, halting their advance. On the Eastern Front, the brutal Battle of Stalingrad began. For months, German and Soviet soldiers fought street by street, house by house. The German Sixth Army was eventually surrounded and forced to surrender in early 1943. It was a catastrophic defeat for Germany, and the beginning of their long retreat from the east. In North Africa, British forces won the Battle of El Alamein, and American troops landed in Operation Torch, squeezing the Axis forces until they surrendered in May 1943. With North Africa secured, the Allies invaded Sicily and then mainland Italy in 1943. Mussolini was overthrown, and Italy surrendered, though German forces continued to fight a bitter campaign up the Italian peninsula. The main focus, however, was on the long-awaited invasion of France. On June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in history was launched. Over 150,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy. Despite facing fierce German resistance, they secured a foothold. After weeks of brutal fighting in the hedgerows of Normandy, the Allies broke out. Paris was liberated in August. Simultaneously, the Soviet Red Army was relentlessly pushing from the east, driving the Germans out of Eastern Europe. By the end of 1944, Germany was fighting a desperate war on two fronts. Hitler's last-gasp offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, failed. As Allied armies crossed the Rhine and pushed into Germany, the true horror of the Nazi regime was laid bare. Soldiers discovered concentration and extermination camps like Auschwitz and Dachau, where millions of Jews, political prisoners, and other minorities had been systematically murdered in the Holocaust. The scale of the depravity was beyond comprehension. In April 1945, with Soviet troops closing in on his bunker in Berlin, Adolf Hitler committed suicide. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Victory in Europe Day was celebrated across the Allied world, but the war was not over. In the Pacific, the fight against Japan was ferocious. Allied forces led by the United States adopted an island-hopping strategy, capturing key islands to use as bases for the eventual invasion of Japan. Battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa were incredibly bloody, with Japanese soldiers fighting to the last man. Faced with the prospect of an invasion that could cost millions of lives, the new American president, Harry Truman, made a fateful decision. He authorized the use of a new, terrifying weapon, the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The devastation was unprecedented. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The formal ceremony took place on September 2nd, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II was finally over. The aftermath was staggering. Over 60 million people were dead. Entire cities lay in ruins. The world map was redrawn. The old European empires crumbled. Two new superpowers emerged: the United States and the Soviet Union. Their ideological rivalry would soon lead to the Cold War. The United Nations was formed in the hope of preventing such a catastrophe from ever happening again. The war also spurred incredible technological advancements, from radar and jets to nuclear energy and computers, which would shape the modern era. World War II remains the most destructive conflict in human history. It was a story of aggression, ideology, and unimaginable suffering. But it was also a story of courage, sacrifice, and the ultimate triumph of a global coalition against tyranny. Understanding this history is not just about remembering the past. It's about learning the lessons to safeguard our future. Thank you for watching this deep dive into World War II. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more historical explanations. What part of the war do you find most fascinating? Let me know in the comments below. See you next time.